Good morning. Um, Welcome to what I believe is the sixth webinar that the Health Data Exploration Project located at UCSD and Cal IT2. I believe this is the sixth webinar we've hosted in our series. Just a quick reminder for those of you who may be new to the series, the Health Data Exploration Project is run out of UCSD, but we have many collaborators. And the project is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and aims to do sort of a host of things to explore barriers and facilitators to the use of personal health data for public health research. And this morning we are very delighted because our webinar will be featuring a group of investigators that were awarded a pilot grant. We call them our Agile grants as part of this project. And the team that will be speaking today will be talking about the work that they've done over the past 9 months or so as part of their pilot project. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Hekler to give us an overview of this morning's presentation and allow him to introduce himself and his co-presenters.
Great, thanks, Cinnamon. So hi, I'm Eric Hekler, and briefly I'm an assistant professor at Arizona State University. And why don't we just go around, Aaron, and then Sally, can you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Aaron Coleman. I'm founder and CEO of Fitabase, and we have been working with researchers for many years now who've incorporated consumer wearables, specifically Fitbit, into their research work with our web-based platform.
Hi, I'm Saili Phatak. I'm a doctoral student in the School of Nutrition and Health Promotion at Arizona State University. I work with Eric at the Designing Health Lab, and my work mainly focuses on developing physical activity interventions using digital technologies.
Great, thanks. So that's us, and so as Cinnamon mentioned, we're lucky enough to be awarded one of the Agile research grants, and so pilot studies. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what we've been doing and what we built for everybody. So our title for our stuff was Exploring the Use of Proximity Sensors in Just-in-Time Adaptive Interventions. So I'm basically going to set the stage by helping you know what a just-in-time adaptive intervention is, and then also what a proximity sensor is, and then we'll dig into that in a little bit more detail. So just-in-time adaptive interventions, why is that interesting? Well, it fits very much with this broader initiative going on with precision medicine. If you haven't heard of this yet, I imagine you will soon enough. It's very much focused on the idea of developing prevention and treatment strategies that take into account individual variations in genes, environment, and lifestyle. And that's really important because it's basically trying to figure out, what's the right thing for the right time for the right person. That's the sort of kind of gestalt question that we're kind of getting into within precision medicine, particularly when it comes to just-in-time adaptive interventions. Within just-in-time adaptive interventions, you can think of it as almost a behavioral way of doing that. And why is that an important thing? Well, as you look at this graph, if you really think about all the factors that have an impact on health, behavior is right at that center, right? There's all these environmental factors that you can see visualized above this. There's all these things within the skin, if you will, all the stuff going on, genomes and whatnot going below. But behavior is this sort of logical linkage in between. So, and just-in-time adaptive interventions are a way to kind of bring all of that together into these highly precise types of interventions. So, and then again, this is just another way of visualizing that same idea, but if you even just think about what the most sorts of variance comes from in terms of health, behavior like physical activity, healthful eating, this explains a large portion of the overall variance overall. So again, really emphasizing the importance of these. So, and then overall, we can really do these things partially because we're getting increasingly personal, pervasive, and powerful technologies such as proximity sensors, smartphones, smartwatches. So we'll get into that in a little bit more. But let's talk a little bit more about what is a just-in-time adaptive intervention. Basically, on the one side, there is this idea of a just-in-time. So what do we mean by that? In essence, we mean that there's a state of opportunity or vulnerability to do a healthy or unhealthy behavior. So you have the opportunity to go for a walk. You might be vulnerable to to smoking a cigarette. But then you also need to be receptive to interacting with an intervention. If you might be getting a message right in the middle of driving, that's not really a moment of receptivity for you. And then also another key point here is that you're targeting a behavior, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen right in that moment. So the idea of, if you want to try to help someone to drink less, the just-in-time moment might not be right when they're about to take a sip. You might have already missed the moment. So sometimes it means you have to actually focus on these states before that happening. So So on the one side, there's basically all these series of just-in-time moments. On the other side, there's adaptation, which means that there's all these different factors. You can imagine that graph that I just showed before of all these factors happening outside the skin and within the skin, all changing and transitioning around you. And in essence, a just-in-time adaptive intervention ideally monitors and takes into account all of those alterations so that you can basically give the highly precise and personalized intervention that we need. So let me show you a little bit more of an example of this. So as another example of a just-in-time state of vulnerability, this is mine. I have a vulnerability when I get home at work. I have a real desire to eat cheese. And so for me, I am vulnerable to eating more cheese than I should. And so this is a state where I've actually been playing a lot on, I've gotten a lot better at it actually, but I used to be very bad at doing this. I identified this as an important state that I needed to design interventions around, such as maybe for this guy, putting a little guy on his cheese to tell him not to do it. On the flip side, a just-in-time state you can imagine is this, right? So this is the perfect choice of should I take the stairs or should I take the elevator, right? And this is a small opportunity, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight it. This is not about these huge changes. It's really trying to find how do you help find the slightly better decision in your life. That's a big part of the just-in-time concept. So with this one, if we can nudge them to people to take the stairs just a little bit more, that can start to accumulate into something really meaningful. So then on the flip side, though, it's important to remember that people need to be receptive. If they're in a state of flow, if they're in the zone, they're not necessarily going to be able to listen to this. And so that's actually an important state in itself. How do you know someone might have the opportunity to do a healthier behavior, but they might not be ready to interact with the intervention? So, for example, this guy maybe was listening to his music and it was just in his zone. I don't know if that was necessarily the best intervention strategy there, but at least he was breaking someone's receptivity, so to speak. And then, so this is now getting back to that point about opportunity. In essence, you can think about these just-in-time moments as slowly accumulating until you sort of build up to get some really interesting, more larger health outcomes, right? So you might get someone to walk 500 steps in one given moment, but if you keep finding those little moments and opportunities when someone can walk more, eventually you can get them to those clinically meaningful outcomes like 10,000 steps a day or other national guidelines. So now let's think about JEDIs, right? There's a lot of pieces. So this is actually one of the just-in-time adaptive interventions that Siley and I are working on. I won't go into all details. The thing I wanted to show with you here is just the idea that a lot of times there's a lot of moving parts. You need to be measuring a lot of things. You have different ways that you translate that into algorithms to make decisions. You have interventions that people actually interact with, and so forth and so on. So this is an agile project, right? So and as part of that, then it means that we're not necessarily going to build all of a JEDI. We were scoping down, and so one of the things that with prior to this grant was the idea of proximity sensors. So you can see we very consciously focused on one small module of a much broader system of a just-in-time adaptive intervention. And so what do we mean by module? This actually has a very concrete language within software development. In essence, there's basically a module has specific inputs. It has a process that somehow manipulates those inputs, and then some output comes out. And so for us, this basically means our inputs are we have iBeacons, we have phone, and we have some metadata about where those iBeacons were placed. Then we have the app basically transforms those into tagged data into a timestamp database, and then a timed output of a CSV indoor location. So I wanted to set this up to say within our Agile project, our core focus was basically trying to think through how do we build a useful module for indoor proximity sensing. And we had the use case of a just-in-time adaptive intervention. But in the mindset of modules and Agile research work, what we wanted to do is build a module that was self-contained so that others can use it for whatever other purpose they want. And it's very similar to how Google Maps works. You see Google Maps all around the internet, right? Not everybody built Google Maps. Google Maps just built a really useful module that other people can incorporate, like in Yelp or something of that sort. That was basically our goal within this project. We were trying to build a module that people could use to basically start measuring indoor location. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Aaron to tell you a little bit more about the proximity sensors.
Great. Thanks, Eric. That's great stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technology behind proximity sensors, and I guess as we sort of move on to sort of the specific app design here, the genesis for really all this was a conversation about sort of the context, and behavior context was obviously a very important piece of this larger JEDI conversation and the systems design that we thought through. And so one of the things that we've noticed on our side of Fitabase is that mobile OS iOS specifically, and then Android and Windows Phone, have now sort of adopted, for retail purposes, this concept of location, understanding your current context using these very small Bluetooth LE beacons. These are very, very simple circuit board design, and they're commercially available at a very low price point, where an app can change its behavior based on the knowledge that is within the area of a beacon. And this is interesting for a few reasons. One, of course, these are commercially available. These are core to the operating system. They don't require any additional background services and processes that would potentially drain the battery very significantly. And it's really being done at the operating system level that a third-party app can tap into. So what we decided to do was to think through how that works. Let's put next slide, please. So as we were looking at the examples that exist today, we saw that Macy's, for instance, adopted one of the largest deployments, where within the store, contextually speaking, if you use the Macy's app, there are things that you may have previously done online that now translate into your environment. So there is sort of an identity that follows you. There are deals sort of that can be tailored to you. This woman here, an example, she's in the bag section, and Macy's has decided this is a good time to highlight one of the specific things that surrounds her. And the nice thing about proximity sensors is that it's an indoor, it's very indoor friendly, where GPS is not. The other thing is that for research, a lot of times, and we know this from previous work with researchers using Fitbits and other wearable devices, that following somebody GPS all day might have some sort of privacy implications. Really, if we just want to know, are they binary? Yes, are they within their home or desk? And we don't really care where home or desk is, for example, in our study. That might be another way we could get around some of these privacy concerns. In this case, Macy's probably does know which retail store you're in. But this was one of the examples we saw early on that, that was done well. And next slide. The other one that we've seen is these build environment examples. And so many of the major league stadiums are using these now as part of the design of the stadium. So different parts of the stadium allow somebody who's going to a sports event to interact with their application differently. It can even help them figure out where their seats are. It gives them activities that people who come often, they can sort of check into. It really does know when they are at the ballpark and can give them essentially prompts or questions or deals, or really have sort of an in-moment conversation where the app can essentially run in the background and prompt them to re-engage with the mobile component of being at the stadium, which is pretty interesting. And translating that to health research was something that early on we had a conversation around. Next slide. So early on we made this very conscious decision, and I wanted to point this out because as others look at if beacons might be appropriate for the kinds of research questions they're asking, there are really two ways in which beacons work at the core of an example of is iOS. There's ranging and then there's regions. Ranging is something that can really be useful if you are trying to, within a given room or within a given very small environment, say, I am within a certain number of meters from this one beacon, and I'm doing this sort of sweeping motion of looking for Bluetooth signals very frequently, every few seconds. Unfortunately, there are very severe battery contexts. You are essentially spinning up the radio of iPhone, Android, or Windows Phone. You're spinning it up to be full powered and looking to try to figure out its strength distances. That really has to be done in the foreground. The other alternative is to essentially create an app where you allow the operating system to periodically sweep for beacons on behalf of your application, and it does it for all the ones that register for beacons. So if you're on iOS, the Apple App Store one does this just as often as your app, our Prox app did, because it's every minute or so looking to see, hey, are there any beacons within range? And then if they are, hand that message back to our application, Prox, for example, and let it decide to do something. This has very minimal battery consequences. However, it doesn't have the granularity of knowing within a few meters where you are. And it also has a small delay. We decided that that was a fair trade-off because we wanted to run an observation for a longer period of time than a day would allow a user to not obviously use their phone. But you could essentially create an app that did both, and I wanted to make sure at least we hit ranging. We focused on basically when do people enter regions, and the regions being defined by these beacon apps that we gave them. Next slide. So I think, Siley, you want to hit this one, or do you want me to?
Sure.
I'll go hand this over to Siley, who really took the reins of setting up these exact experiments within this project.
Awesome. Right. So just bringing together what Aaron and Eric both spoke about, the proximity sensor part and the just-in-time moment part. So the assumption here is that if like the user's precise location can be an important part of the context, which basically affects their opportunity or receptivity to interventions, right? And so if you know where exactly the beacon's placed, you can also have an idea about when a person enters or exits that region. And so you can possibly take the idea was that you can possibly take advantage of some key locations for targeting behavior change interventions. Like for example, you might be able to do something like if you know a specific location where a person carries out an undesired behavior, usually you might be able to target that location or tailor messages based on specific locations to make it contextually relevant. So it seemed like there were a lot of directions we could take with the proximity sensors in this broad realm. But the problem here was that we did not really know if it's a feasible signal or how exactly we could use these proximity sensors or the signals that's coming out of it. So we had sort of two goals from this Agile project. One was developing the open source toolkit, where basically other researchers could make use of this signal that's coming from these proximity sensors. And the second was to see if it's a feasible signal to be used in within just-in-time interventions. Next slide, please. So to begin with, we started with some semi-structured interviews with around 12 people, mainly because it's a new concept. So we just wanted to understand perceptions related to proximity sensors, just what kind of locations we might be able to, which might be useful for personalized behavior change interventions. And also one important thing was perceptions related to privacy and security. So some interesting ideas came up from these interviews, like Eric mentioned a few of them before, but something like prompting to go for a workout when close to shoes, or prompts to sit less at work. One more important one, which ended up being quite common, was the ability to shut off notifications in places that people did not want to be disturbed. So potentially being a burden reducing strategy. Next slide, please. So two things mainly came out of this. One was like people did find this concept of a third person knowing their precise location. It seemed creepy to some people, in their own words. And the second thing was that lots of individual differences came up in these perceptions related to just receptivity, or what locations people think they might be receptive, or cell phone usage habits, and just interruptibility in general. Next slide, please. So two take-homes from our interviews. One was we needed to address some the security and privacy concerns when using this technology, and the second was in order to do some rapid prototyping, just to get into testing whether this is feasible or not, we needed to narrow down and focus on some concrete use case. Next slide, please. Right, so Eric briefly mentioned this before. So the use case that we chose was just-in-time intervention to reduce sitting and increase walking in the office environment, mainly because we would be able to test these beacons in under one roof with a few participants. So for this, Aaron developed the Prox app. We called it Prox, which is the open source location sensing app, and he did go out of his way to develop the second app for us, which is Prox Message, which is the app that took the information from the Prox app and then delivered the push notifications, which were the suggestions to sit less and walk more. All right, and then Aaron's gonna take over this one.
So let's talk about a little bit of the development process here, because this was a small agile grant where we were trying to be as simple as possible with the development, and of course the reuse case for this was important to us because I think this is a new technology where we really want to understand if researchers find value in this and understand the trades-off and can use this app to better understand the trades-off to put this technology as part of a piece of one of their strategies for designing mHealth interventions. And so we really want it to be simple and free. It's open source. It maintains a lot of the good principles we know to be true from necessity for research. So it can be run de-identified. It doesn't have the actual locations of the person anywhere. It runs in the background. There's really no burden on the participant. And those were sort of the main goals. And running serverless was also a component. And we know that essentially sometimes at the pilot stage, it's really almost a no-budget proposition. So being able to essentially use our app for free and be able to test out with a small pilot like we did one participant at a time or 10 or so is basically trivial with this application that we've developed, and we hope others find use from it. Next slide. So this is a quick animation here that will kind of show us a little bit of the setup. So in the first screen, the participants have a very basic prompt. When we set it up, Siley would take the app. She would essentially assign them a participant ID on their phone, holding their phone with them present. She would put a participant ID in and then have several beacons ready to go. And of course, these beacons are the Estimote brand that we've been talking about. The setup screen here, it has everything the researcher needs to get this started, and participants can see this screen here. Next slide. So setting up the beacons is really simple. You take you decide a beacon that you're going to set up. You click on Set Up Beacons, essentially. You type in the name of the beacon that you want. So this is typing in the desk beacon we're going to put. You can assign it a category. This category is just tapped. And category is an optional area that we decided we would include so that data exports would include these categorizations. Next slide. And then a beacon essentially is placed on the phone, directly on the phone, and the identifier of that beacon is then recorded for, let's say, the desk label. So this will work with any Estimote beacon. And then what happens here, as you can see, is after a moment or so, the app identifies that unique that ID for the beacon, and it is then saved. And so the process for setting up participants, of course, the trade-off of being a serverless design is that each phone has to be taken, and then the beacon's configured and then handed back with instructions to the participants. One other optional way of doing this was if you have some that are in a common area, which we did, is you can export. You'll see on the top there's an export functionality. So you could take a few that are sort of common to everybody, have an export, and have that be a starting point, and then import them into subsequent phone apps. Of course, this could be done with some sort of remote server design. However, we found that to be maybe something that was not as simple to implement if you had to put up a server component. So this is a slight manual process, but this is the way it can be configured by anyone. Next slide. And then exporting the data. So exports can be done in two ways. One, it can be configured with a SMTP email account if you want to use a university account that it's inside of the firewall. If you want to use a Gmail account, anything that supports SMTP can essentially be an export pointer. So these apps essentially can generate the CSV files internally on the phone and then put them in the stored mailbox. If Dropbox suits your needs as well, you can also create a Dropbox account, and you can use Dropbox to essentially take all the participant data. And of course, since we put a participant ID, that's the only identifier that these CSV files have attached to them. So it is a CSV file that has the participant ID, and those are the labels for these files as they get put into a central location for researchers. In this version, in the very basic version, the phone has to be brought back, and researcher can log in and hit the button to export. Potentially, with open source, we could have people contribute new versions where that can be done, maybe with some sort of timer, some sort of trigger, some sort of ask from the participants. Entering and exiting regions might even be enough of a trigger, but we didn't explore that in this. This was really designed to be a very small observational tool. Next slide. And then the participants screens are very basic. You can configure these to say what it is your study is doing. So in this very basic example, your phone is recording encounters with proximity sensors. If you want to be more specific so the participants can sort of, again, go back to the app and open it up and see what is going on, you can sort of be more specific there. And we provide a quick little questions email address that you can set. So if at some point somebody is concerned or confused about why it is that they have this app on their phone and they want to get in touch with the research group, you configure the screen that allows that, and then you essentially lock them out of the admin tools using a password that you input here. So once you have locked the app, essentially, it goes into this mode where both screens now have essentially a very simple prompt. One says that the settings have been locked, and the other is that participant can ask questions via email to the research staff. And then once the phone comes back with the passphrase, the admin settings can be unlocked. Next screen. And data looks like this. So there are many, many rows that the CSV file will contain. The events when a person was entering and exiting a region. And a region is essentially anywhere where a proximity sensor that has been configured can be seen and received. And so in this example, we see that a region was entered at November 9th, 2015 at 2:02 p.m. in the -7, so that would be probably Arizona time zone, and then left basically less than a minute later, left that region. So the phone is basically doing that work and is saying, well, I'm seeing there's a beacon, I'm seeing there's a beacon, I'm seeing there's a beacon. Now I don't see there's a beacon. So it is setting those, and then we have the beacon identifier number, the UUID, that's the specific one, and the minor range of the beacon, which is another identifier that's used to group beacons, and then the category. So we categorized this one in the previous setup as a home beacon. So if you wanted to essentially very quickly scan all of your beacon interactions, if you had multiples in the home, you could look at them based on those category assignments that was configurable inside the app. And so a researcher can basically collect this kind of data, very simple understanding of context throughout a person's given day when they encounter certain regions. Next slide. And then we wanted to touch on prox message. So this was sort of a very quick way to sort of simulate what a just-in-time adaptive intervention might do with the beacon signal. So we essentially made a copy-paste of prox and then added this very quick notification ability. So we actually don't configure the apps here. We pull the configurations from the prox app sensors and we import it to this one. And Eric and Siley created some very simple step counting or step, I would say, prompts or sitting prompts where persons would be at their desks for too long or they would be encountering certain regions in the workplace and be prompted to go a little farther in their day with their step counts. And this was to simulate the just-in-time adaptive intervention that might be a little bit more complicated, but this was sort of a very quick way of getting that done. Next slide. And I think I'll hand it back over here to Siley.
Awesome. Okay. So coming to the actual study that we did, we ran a short study. I just want to point out that more than the quantitative differences in actual physical activity, we kind of focused on the qualitative insights that we got from it. It was more about documenting what issues or what opportunities and challenges come when we're trying to use this app. So we recruited just four employees from one of the office locations on the ASU campus. We installed both the apps that we just mentioned, Prox and Prox Message, on all of their phones, and provided them Fitbit Charge HR trackers. And what we did with the beacons was we kind of made it individualized in the sense within the office location, they could choose these locations that they think they visit often on a regular day at the office, so they could choose those locations and we placed the beacons there. Along with that, we also chose some common locations which we thought most employees frequent often, like the kitchen area or the water fountain or the front desk. And then the third was we placed one beacon each on each of their desks. Next slide, please. So this was what the study design was like, a pretty simple A/B design. It was a total of 4 weeks and split into 2 weeks each. So our phase A was the baseline phase. We usually tend to keep it as a 2 weeks phase just to address any novelty effects. People sometimes tend to change their behavior. Many times they tend to change their behavior if they're being tracked and observed. So 2 weeks of that just to measure their baseline physical activity levels, and we asked them to maintain their regular physical activity during this time. And phase B was when we introduced these prompts, which I will talk about in just a moment. Right. So some issues that I want to mention before I get into the prompts were that there were some limitations which we knew, which came up during the prototyping phase, which we knew, but we couldn't address in this project per se. So one was we had no knowledge at the time when the participant's phone wasn't with them. There was no way that we could keep track of this. There's potentially some ways you could do it, but we didn't have the resources to do it during this project. The second was that beacon ranges, I mean, Aaron can add to this, but the beacon range is pretty high. So we realized that we couldn't place, there couldn't be too many beacons too close to each other. And so we couldn't do extremely fine-grained tracking. We did not know, we did not have any idea about the distances between the beacons. So that was one thing. And then the third thing was that this was just one of the signals that we just use proximity sensors to kind of infer receptivity, but of course you could be using plenty of other data sources to more accurately infer that. Thanks. So coming to phase B, again, 2 weeks, what we did was we send them prompts in the form of push notifications that Aaron already showed. So we had two types of prompts. One was the desk-based prompts. The idea there being that if they were sitting for approximately more or less 60 minutes, they get a prompt saying, hey, sitting for too long, why not go take a walk? And then the other one was these on-the-move locations. So the locations I mentioned, like the kitchen or the water fountain, we call them the on-the-move locations. And the sort of notifications they got at those moments were, hey, you're already on the move, why not walk a little more back to your destination? So that was the idea. We also send them these daily quick EMA or daily surveys just to get insights from what their experiences were with getting these notifications every day. Right. So just coming to some quick qualitative insights, the main key insights that we got from running this. So first of all, users found it really difficult to carry their phones. Especially when they were when they left their desks just for a short break, like just going from their desk to grab a printout from the copy room or something, and that people don't usually tend to carry their phones for these short moments, and so that was one problem that came up quite often for most participants. And the second one was these on the move just-in-time prompts. So when a person enters the beacon range, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the participant enters the beacon range, and then the time between the participant entering that range and the Prox message app triggering the message, there's a certain time lag, and so if the person has already moved out, if the person is already back on the desk, those kind of prompts were losing their relevance. And especially because they were specifically worded like, hey, you're on the move, why not take a walk? But if they were already back at their desk, they're not so relevant anymore. So that was one thing that we came across with. But the third thing was that the desk-based prompts seemed to be much more stable. People, our users did find them more useful and even noticed them much more than they did the others. Right, so from the lessons we learned, kind of these don't forgets. So first thing was the window of opportunity. We kind of focus just on the moment, but now the more we think about it, you don't always, not all locations might be relevant for just focusing on the moment, but you might want to think about that window of opportunity, the kind of prompts you send, you might want to remember how much time a person spends at that location and think about that when designing these interventions. The second was, again, I mentioned this before, distance between the beacons. Unless you have a knowledge of what the distance is, you don't want to place them too close to each other. The third, again, users may not carry their phone at all times, at all locations, so bear that in mind if you're trying to use it in just-in-time prompts per se. The fourth was mode of delivery. So on the iPhone, when you send a notification, the default is just a banner, right? So you just get the notification on the top of your screen, and then it disappears, and then it just enters the notification center. So we found that the just-in-time, the on-the-move prompts, if they were missed, they just sat in the notification center, and the users were not really noticing them. And the last one was the phone being on silent and vibrate. That is a huge a problem or a thing that you should consider when using them in these prompts. did not use all the resources that could potentially be used in these interventions. So one thing could be integration with smartwatches. I think can be a very smart move, because you can potentially, overcome this problem of people not carrying their phone with them at all times, or just it might make it easier for when it might be easier to notice your intervention. Sorry, your notifications might get noticed more if it's like a vibration on your wrist. Then there's also other sources of data, like calendar for busyness. You could have accelerometers. You could even just so we kind of we assess, like, if they were at their desk, if they were in close proximity to their desk for more or less 60 minutes, we assume they were sitting at their desk, but you might be able to use some sensors to actually see if they were sitting at their desk or not. And the third thing was distances. I think that if you can actually know or measure distances between beacons, I think it can open a lot of doors in this field. And not just-in-time interventions, not just to drive these interventions, but I think it can, these sensors and the signal that comes through them can also be really useful in understanding just the context of, factors related to health behavior. And
so we do have the ability to distribute this now. It's available on GitHub. Those are code and time. And we also have a website. Actually, that URL should be fitabase.com/blog. Go to the Fitabase blog. That's where we'll update that link, so that link works as well. But fitabase.com/blog will have the links to a sign-up form. If you'd like to kind of play with this in sort of the way we had it configured, we can help you with that. We should have an iTunes version available. There are just a few hurdles left to make it sort of very cleanly and broken out and compatible and totally disentangled from the way we configured our emails system to work for it to go on the Apple Store. So that should be available shortly. So put us sign up on the contact page that we have, fitabase.com/blog, and there'll be a place there. You'll be the first to kind of get access to the app as well. And of course, this really is an experiment that continues on beyond this. We would love additional help if you want to put development resources behind this, expand the app and functionality. I will continue to, and my team will continue to treat that as an open source project that lives on. There are stubs for an Android version in there. You will see we actually did part of the Android UI, but did not complete the Android version because their beacon implementation moved to a new standard called Eddystone. So if you want to get involved with that, we would love help as well. But really, we're curious to take this next year, I think, and continue this on and understand where researchers might find, knowing now that there are granularity sort of issues and concerns, but opportunities and the strengths and weaknesses we really hope shine through when you start to play with this technology. We'd love to kind of hear more and be involved with anybody who has comments, use cases. So please check out the resources we've put out. Prox is completely open source today on GitHub, and there are additional screenshots, information on that page as well. Next slide. I think that's it. I think we are here for question time.
Great. Thank you guys for such a really interesting presentation, and what a creative idea. Really fascinating. I have a couple questions myself, but we've also gotten at least one question from Twitter. This is from Gary Wolf. Aaron, what are the limits of how many phones a single beacon can talk to? And he also asks, can you say something more about the time resolution and proximity accuracy of the system?
Yeah, great questions, Gary. Hi, Gary. The quantified self questions are awesome. I think this is a great tool even for individual research, and I forgot to hit that, but there really are no limitations in terms of the number of beacons that you could configure. The way we have the app set up today, if you can buy a 3-pack or a 10-pack from Estimote, and you just need to set them up on your phone individually. The resolution is going to be essentially that the phone is going to iOS. I can speak to a little bit more familiarly. it's basically every minute or two, it's basically, looking up in the Bluetooth stack and saying, hey, what am I surrounded by? And if I'm surrounded by one of these beacons who have registered to the operating systems being one that I care about, then do some action that's registered for it. And so our app is the app that's doing that. So you can tell iOS, hey, register for beacon 1 through 10, if those were the simple numbers they were, and the phone will take that action and record it. It records it to the second granularity that it observed it, not necessarily the second granularity that you entered that region. So just know that it may be plus, actually I think the official spec says maybe even like 3 or 4 minutes, but in our testing it was a little bit more. Actually, one other really important point to note about that, we started getting curious about, when exactly are these beacons getting hit? When am I actually, can I see that? So there is a screen, in the setup, it's the very bottom of the setup page, it's a little toggle that says show debug notification. So that probably is the place you'd want to swipe it on. So what that does, it doesn't delay. Basically, whenever a beacon is encountered by operating system and our app fires, immediately it sends a push notification to the force screen. So we were doing that, and it was getting a little tiresome here. After a day or two, we turned it off. But walking around our building here, and figuring out when I'd go upstairs, and I'd know that within a second or two, like a notification happened. So I kind of started to feel that out, and we ended up adding that little flag and that little test specifically to get a better understanding, because that is a very important piece of understanding, what your prompts will be and how you would intervene, is understanding the timeliness of it. There are trade-offs, and I think that's an important part of what we're trying to see. We're trying to help people understand if this is the right technology for the intervention we're trying to do.
Great.
But I think just knowing that came from Gary, let's just reemphasize that. This is a really good QS tool. If anyone wants to just track what's going on in their lives, where they're going, what they're doing, just buy some beacons, download the app, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I was curious about, I was kind of listening when you were talking about your initial interviews and how you were exploring some of the, the extent to which people had privacy concerns. I was a little bit surprised when you said some of your participants said they were concerned about sort of the creepiness of somebody always knowing where they were, since anybody who has their Google Maps turned on is going to be in that situation anyway. So just curious if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
I think it was more of, so when we were talking about it, the whole focus was indoor location sensing, right? So I think a lot of them were thinking in terms of, oh, they'll know exactly which room in my house I'm sitting in and how much. So it was more of that more than a broad location. It was like within the house, they'll know exactly how much time I'm spending in what room and stuff. That was more of.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like if you're in the bathroom, do you really want other people to know?
Yeah, it was.
that was the creepy factor that was coming up.
Got it. Okay. And what do you think about that? Is it just kind of like some people will, sort of the benefits will be worth it for some people?
Well, if I can jump in on that one briefly. So I think this is part of the reason why we decided early on, well, not just the server issue of like the pragmatics, but we also liked the idea of the information staying on the phone, because then it really was locked in, so to speak. It's like it was their personal data and it was on their phone, and it was their choice on if we could ever see their phone again if they didn't want it, right? Technically. But the second part to that is, I think you nailed it, Cinnamon. In terms of like I think this is an important question that we, the researchers, if we want someone to give us our data like this, we need to be very mindful of the privacy implications of this. And if we are going to do the server route where we're keeping track of it, how are we going to do it in a way that enables that to be done ethically? And I know there's, obviously, Camille Nebeker at UCSD, I know you're working with her on this, but there's all these interesting ethical issues that come up. I think a lot of these kind of bubble to the surface with this, and in particular, when Siley was doing a lot of these interviews, we were very mindful of trying to make sure they really understood the concept that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm quite certain that if we didn't spend the time helping them understand what we were talking about, they'd probably be like, yeah, sure, whatever. And I bet that's also exactly what they do right now for GPS. And once they actually be like, wait a minute, you know where I am every moment of the day? I bet a lot more people would be a lot more creeped out by that. It's just the fact that it's sort of an ignorance is bliss world right now. But ethically, I don't think that's a good way for us to be going. So.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and of course, yeah, this is a challenge for so many researchers and industry folks. I was also kind of thinking through, you had mentioned in sort of your take homes one issue around sort of behaviors happening in certain contexts. And as you were describing, like people who don't take their phone with them, or other sort of lifestyle factors, I was thinking about, if you have, ideas about how you would tailor it to people at different, stages in their life. So, for instance, this is a little bit random, but I have 2 young kids, and so like I take my phone with me everywhere I go, even if I do get up from my desk for a minute, because you're always waiting for that call from the daycare, right? So anyway, I was just kind of curious, thinking through people at different stages in their lives or other factors.
I can start that, but Siley, I think also will probably have some insights from the different individual differences we had. But I mean, I think the nice thing about the way we programmed this is that it is, people label them whatever they want to label them, right? And so as part of that, it means that you can, it quite literally can adjust depending on where you want the beacons to be and how they should be used, right? So if you want to be tracking this information, particularly if you think about this more in a quantified self realm, right? If you want to allow someone to track whatever they want to track, they can pick the locations that matter for them. So, but there were a lot of interesting individual differences that came up. So, Siley?
Yeah, so okay, now I get what you're saying. So I think it was when we asked people, what locations do you think you might want to use these sensors? There were a lot of differences. Some people were like, there's no way I'm putting anything like this in my home, but it might be useful at work, or I never use my phone at work. I usually just use my Mac because all the notifications nowadays you can get mostly all the notifications on your computer as well. So that's actually why we ended up narrowing it down, I think, to this use case, because we realized that people just have there's just too many variations in how people would like to use them, how they use their phone, when they don't use their phone, times of day when they want to be with their phone versus I don't want to be disturbed right now.
Sure. So we have a couple of more questions coming in from viewers. The first one is, great presentation. What again is the cost of a beacon and what is their range? Oh, it just went away.
How might triangulation be?
Yeah, it just moved. Sorry about that. And how might triangulation be accomplished?
That's Aaron.
Aaron, do you want to do that?
Yeah, I can take that. So there are many different beacon providers. We essentially just went with one of the sort of well-known and sort of nicely, they're kind of colored and rubberized packaging, and they're pretty durable, called Estimote. I think it's one of the major brands. These are not very complicated devices. Taken apart, they really are just a very large battery that has in the Estimote's case, a 3-year longevity, and a Bluetooth chip that essentially just chirps its identifier over and over again, so that you can do with that what you want. Essentially, just, hey, here I am, here I am. The cost of these is very. We've seen them. There are others. The Radius Network makes one that's, I think, even less expensive. The ones we used were 3 for $99. However, right as the project got started, there was a back order of these, and there was another version of the Estimote released where there was a 10-pack for $100. They're called stickers. They have some drawbacks as well. They're not chirping as often. However, they have the promise, if you really want to stay within the Estimote family, they have the promise of doing some different triangulation methods. We did not. We didn't time this in a way where we really could explore that sticker pack, which has a little more functionality but some drawbacks. It would be an interesting thing to compare. In terms of range, the ranging is smaller. But one thing we did note, and Siley sort of hit it really quickly, with in a small apartment, these are too powerful, the ones we have. So a less powerful version would be more ideal. So within an apartment with 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, whatever, you may essentially always be hearing both beacons if it's the front door or the back. So that's a caveat as well, that understanding how far you can put these apart is going to be important. And I think one of the things you can explore using this application and understand if this is one of the. We think this is really, like Eric's slide said, this is maybe one input or maybe several inputs you want to include as part of a design of a study. Maybe it's its own. Maybe it's basically based off of just proximity sensors, but it may be one piece of the puzzle. And the other nice thing is you can do things that trigger or just understand context over a previous day. You could say all the interactions mean there was this one decision point that we're going to do. You don't have to do it right in the moment. So there's many ways you could think through how a beacon and context play into the overall design of an intervention.
If I could just jump in on that, what's the difference in range between the sticker versus the beacon? Because I think it was like 10 meters for the beacon and like 3 to 4 for the sticker, right?
Something like that. It was
somewhere around there. I'm not
something like that. However, the stickers implement their own protocol. They implement iBeacon, but not as often. So the downside is shorter range and fewer sort of pings per minute. So essentially, you could get some false positives where iOS is expecting to see a beacon, but it's not in range. So the sticker, since it's not going as often as it needs to, says you've left the region and then you come back to the region because it was expecting that it would chirp at least once every 20 seconds or something. I'm not specific on that, but we ended up saying that the stickers by themselves made for bad beacons if you didn't use the Estimote-specific software development kit. And so that's an important point. If you're really going to use these stickers, which have the promise of triangulation, you should check out estimote.com because they have a nice walkthrough of this video of this environment where somebody's walking through a museum gallery, I think is their example, and understanding where they are in the museum gallery specifically, how close they are to certain paintings was the example they gave. There's a promising technology, but it really is, when we tried, we did actually try pulling it in, and it was still so alpha code that it was buggy enough where we had to just say this needs to mature a little bit. I think in the months since they've come out with new releases, where that might be something to play with, it's just, to date it's a very emerging technology, but maybe something that you might want to look at.
And that would be a great part for the open source part. If you want to get into that, that's where our open source code is. That would be a great extension for any developers out there who might want to play around with this.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple more questions. So let me just read them real quick. So one is, can you tell me who decided the locations where the beacons are attached, participants or researchers?
Right. So it was a mixture of both, I would say. So we did make it individualized. We asked them to give us a list of locations that they think they frequent in their office. So something like a particular coworker's desk or this particular copy room or something like that. So they had that freedom. And we also chose some common locations, which we thought everyone usually goes to, like the front desk or water fountain. There was both.
Okay. Let's see. Here's another one. Very interesting they keep moving. Very interesting technology, but for phase B of your experiments, if you had used only an accelerometer, wouldn't the results have been pretty much the same?
I think so. It was more, yeah, I mean, probably.
Well, the difference is that you don't understand where they are in context of their day. So you might understand, well, I got up and moved, because that part might be satisfied, except that the accelerometer is really also handed off to the operating system level. So you would really more have to find a way to get your app to rehydrate, and then you'd be able to retroactively go back. Beacons actually, when you enter a region, it actually have to run code in the foreground. So you can do things like basically monitor the exact point. But accelerometer, we wouldn't know. We know that they got up on the desk, but we wouldn't know where they are in the context of their day. They may be getting up from sitting at the breakfast table.
I think Aaron just hit that.
Sorry, I thought this meant Fitbit versus accelerometer. Or sorry.
So let me try to expand on that a little bit, because they're complementary data, and this is what Siley was getting at the end. We very much think that the triangulation is not just triangulation between beacons, but also triangulation of different data sources, right? So yes, both the proximity sensors and accelerometer could both tell us when they're moving, for sure. Proximity sensors, though, because we have them tagged with different locations, and we can put them feasibly all throughout an office or put it in someone's car, the stickers are small enough we could this was our original solution to try to figure out when they're carrying their phone, stick it on their phone. You could stick it on other people, you can stick it on your dog. it allows you to actually tag what's going on around you. So it is really giving you a sense of context, whereas you completely lack that with accelerometry data. You just get a sense of movement. And I would particularly think that if you put those two things together, you'll actually have a much richer sense of what's going on. You might be able to do something like inferring, what activities they're actually doing, who they're doing it with, and whatnot. But again, it's part of the overall flow of the structure. They're complementary would be our way of thinking about it.
All right. So just a couple more questions, and I also just want to mention we have about 5 more minutes left, so hopefully we'll just try to get through these last couple questions. It's terrific that we've had so many questions. Was a message triggered whenever a participant reached any of the distributed beacons as well? The same message always, no matter which beacon was, I can't read that, approached? Is there any way to
I can try to make that. Oh yeah, Aaron, you want it?
The logistics of that were what we coded in. We basically hard coded into the Prox message app was the beacon when you were at your desk would set a timer within Prox message, and so if you did not leave that region after a certain amount of time, the region, you would get a notification to say, hey, maybe it's time to get up. And the way we did that was individualized by categories. So we had categories. One was common, so if you basically, it's kind of like a clearer. So if we noticed you were at your desk and then the next moment you were at the water cooler, we knew you'd gotten up. Or if you were consistently at your desk and you never actually left, that timer could continue to go. And then we had a random factor as well. We didn't want to make it like every time you sat down or every time you were at home and you got the same prompt. So I think it was less than half of the times that you actually, maybe it was half, I don't remember the exact, we put a weight on it essentially. Yeah, so you would
technically we ran a micro-randomization study design where basically every time they were on the desk after 60 minutes, that was our decision rule on if they prompt them or not, and the other one was whenever they walked by the commons, they would get it or not. And to the question of did they get the same thing? No, they got it half the time they didn't, but then the second thing they got was we had a list, I think, how many did we make, like 10, 15 messages or something that it randomly selected through.
In both categories, yeah.
In both categories.
All right, one more question. Do you have an open API so you can trigger external interventions and or obtain the data to adopt an outside intervention?
No, we would love that as a contribution if anybody wants to get involved. Essentially, you could, since this is really living on the phone, you could contribute a module to Prox that takes advantage of all of our setup. Basically, just does a quick ping to your system the other way, so you could write essentially, well, a Prox event happened, so I'm going to feed that into a larger system, which is really the thinking in terms of where this fits into the JEDI the overall design. This would be one of the contributors that way. Bringing another system into this one. This is a really lightweight, small project that I think maybe belongs in the bigger scope of somebody else's design. But take a look at our code. If you want to shoot me an email, I can show you specifically where I think that might be a good spot to put it in. You can start playing around there. I'd be happy to do that.
And
Great.
Also, we do have our Prox message app, which we are open to discuss and share and those sorts of things. It's not quite ready for open source. Just that's not because we want to don't want to share, just because we need to clean it a little more. But that would be another way to kind of help with that, because that's in essence exactly what we did with the Prox message. So
Sure. So I want to kind of wrap things up. Eric, do you want to say any final words about what your most immediate next steps are?
So our most immediate next steps are really, going back to the purpose of this, we wanted to build a self-contained module that other people can start to use. And we thought that there was interesting opportunity for indoor proximity sensors in research. We've hit 3 use cases. One we played around with is the JEDI, but a second one's just using it for, like, imagine you're using EMA or things like that. You can easily now use our tool for that. And then the third is quantified selfers, letting them explore themselves. We invite anyone who wants to play around with those things to come on, and if you're a developer, get into our open source code and start working on it with us. We want to see what are the boundary conditions on when this module is and is not useful.
Great. Well, thank you all for presenting this morning. I think that it was a really interesting presentation and got a lot of good questions. So thank you everyone else for tuning in. I think that's it. We will be sending announcements for our next webinar, which is actually next week, right? It's next Thursday, yeah. So look for an email and some tweets about that, and we hope you all will tune in again. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.